Hey, I'm David Adelsheim. The story of Adelsheim Vineyard began in 1971. That was the year that Ginny and I decided to risk our life savings on a piece of property in Oregon's North Willamette Valley. Looking back now, we were one of just 10 families that made wine before 1980 from grapes planted on our properties in that region. To celebrate the 50th anniversary of what became our first vineyard, we wanted to tell our story. But we quickly realized that the only way to truly tell our story was to tell the stories of that entire first generation. Our winery team proposed an idea, a series of video conversations with the founders of those first 10 wineries and me. I loved it and set to work contacting my old friends. In each interview, we wanted to go beyond their widely known histories to discover who these people really were and what led them to build our uniquely collaborative, and at least from today's perspective, incredibly successful wine industry. This is our shared story. On a Saturday afternoon in early 1975, Ginny and I were driving into Portland for some shopping when we came to a horrible realization. Having recently met Pat and Joe Campbell, we'd been invited for a meal in the house that they just finished building on the site of their newly planted vineyard. We'd been looking forward to comparing notes with the Campbells on building houses and planting vineyards. But we'd spaced out the invitation, and of course back then there were no cell phones. Chagrined, we called from a payphone as soon as we could. Pat said, "No problem, come tomorrow instead." I remember we had rabbit. We were able to chat with Pat and Joe on a sunny October 9th, 2020, sitting in the original Elk Cove vineyard that they planted in 1974. Pat and Joe, thank you so much for letting us come to, this is the original planting, right?
Absolutely. These are
It is.
Our original vines.
46
planted
years old.
In 74.
Yep.
So,
And Dave, thank you before we start for all your hard work.
oh, we'll
Yes.
see, we'll see,
Yeah.
we'll see.
And not only for this, but for everything you've done for
Yeah.
the industry.
Yes.
Okay, cut that out.
No.
All right. What I wanted to do in starting this video is to talk about you before you came to the winery, before you bought this property, before you were here, because the group of people that really founded the industry didn't know each other before that. I don't believe that any of them, other than David Lett and Chuck Corey and Bill Fuller, who were in a class at Davis for 1 year together, but that anybody else knew each other. So, Pat, you grew up in the Hood River area.
Right.
Agricultural. What was the role of wine, if there was one, in your family?
There wasn't really any role of wine in our family except for my uncle's dandelion wine, which I never tasted, but we did have a lot of farming going on. We raised apples, pears, strawberries, and so it was great fun. I got to drive the tractor and do grafting of fruit trees, and those were probably my most important jobs, but then there was pulling brush and other things as well.
And growing up on a farm like nobody else in the wine industry at the beginning,
I can believe.
was this something that was in the back of your mind as you and Joe were sort of deciding your way in the universe, or were you trying to get away from it, or?
Not at all. No, I definitely, when we moved back to Oregon from South Dakota in '72, that was my goal, is to somehow get into some kind of farming. And we were living in Hood River at that time, and we looked around the valley for south-facing slopes. Even in the back of our mind, we started thinking grapes. because we knew the industry was starting in the Willamette Valley.
So, and I'm going to get to you.
I'm patient. I'm patient. No.
So you were looking around Hood River
Right.
at the beginning. It's one thing to grow up on a farm and to be in South Dakota, and it's another thing to be looking for land to grow grapes. I mean, that isn't a necessary follow-on. What happened in there?
Well, for one thing, when we were in South Dakota, we did make wine from choke cherries and the small grapes along the creeks, and not that they were great wines or anything, but we got the idea of fermentation and how magical it was. And then when we came to, after we bought our property here, we started making home wine more seriously from Washington grapes.
So I want to turn temporarily, Joe, to you and ask roughly the same questions. Where did you grow up?
In Hood River.
Did you?
Right in Hood River.
In the town?
My parents owned a small motel. It had originally 8 units. And the idea was that was my parents' work as they started into the years of retirement. It didn't work out too well. The main highway, Highway 80, bypassed Hood River. And every month, my parents would scrape together the amount of money to pay the mortgage. And so that was a big worry in my family. And I started work when we moved there in 1949, delivering newspapers. And I just added up the other day, I had 11 paid jobs before I graduated from high school. So although I didn't grow up on a farm, I learned the value of hard work.
The necessity thereof.
If I wanted to have any extra spending money. And I also worked on the farms.
Was that more in the summer or?
Yeah, in the summers or during harvest. I picked fruit, I thinned fruit. I met Pat in a strawberry patch, picking strawberries. We both were picking strawberries.
Yep.
And was that in high school or when was
that? When we first met, how old were you?
I was 9.
She was 9, I must have been 12.
But we picked strawberries in the same field.
We did.
And he and his buddies were very impressive. Strawberry
Well,
pickers.
we worked hard. And one of the businesses my brother and I started was we both went to the head of Safeway locally, made an arrangement where they would buy all the blackberries, wild ones we could pick. So we had boards and so forth to get to the best blackberries. And we sold crates and crates of blackberries to Safeway.
And was that multi-year or was that just 1 year?
I think it was just 1 year.
Yeah.
I had less difficult jobs other years.
Yeah, I mean, picking blackberries is not the world's most fun.
No.
Yeah.
For sure.
So when you were 9 and you were 12, did you continue to know each other from that time on?
No. It was just that we were in the same strawberry field and I was admiring him. And then when I was in high school and he was in college, he asked me to go out. And
my best friend was dating her older sister. And he said, hey, she has a younger sister.
And did you know that you already knew who she was?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, 3 years is a big deal.
Yeah.
And when you're in grade school and high school and even the beginning of college. Where were you going to college that it would make sense to see somebody in high school in Hood River?
Well, I went to college at Harvard, but
that's
and
not
I was the
Harvard
first,
on the Columbia, not that one.
Yeah. But I was the first from my high school. My high school had existed for maybe 50 years, and I was the first to ever go east of the Mississippi River in 50 years. Wow. And then my younger brother also went to Harvard. But I had a full scholarship. I was admitted to Yale. They didn't offer me a full scholarship, and so I couldn't go. Yeah.
I don't know that I knew that. That's, I mean, coming out of scraping together 2 pennies and going to Harvard is no mean feat.
Well, Dave, one of the things that I think helped me get in, I think my work background, the fact that I'd gone in American Field Service, but also...
Wait. The American Field Service was like to Iceland or something?
No, it was to all different countries for the summer. And I went to France my junior year.
Right.
And,
okay.
Yeah. And anyway, you're supposed to take the SATs, I believe, in, I don't know, February, April, something. Yeah. And instead of taking them, it was on a Saturday, I would have to go to Portland. I asked my principal, I said, I'm supposed to take these ACTs. He said, oh, I've heard of them. Right? Well, this is in 1956. Right, I've heard of them. So I was to go to Portland, and it conflicted with one of my basketball games. So I phoned the admissions office at Harvard. I said, I can't take the SATs now. I have a basketball game tonight. And when I got to Harvard, the dean came up to me and he said, you're the guy who thought your basketball game was more important. I didn't take the SATs till summer.
But
before.
And had they admitted you by then?
No, they admitted me really late.
Amazing.
Yeah, but I think that's part of what helped me get in.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So you were going to Harvard. You were finishing up high school. Mm-hmm. You went to college after that.
Yes.
And where did you go?
I went to University of Oregon.
That doesn't sound like an ag school.
No. I studied French and German, and I enjoyed that very much. And it came in handy later when we went to Burgundy and Champagne.
So you both got through school. When did you get married?
We got married in 1966 in San Francisco, and
something else.
So right after college, I moved to San Francisco, and I worked at a jazz nightclub for a year and a half, which I loved, and Joe was at Stanford by that time in medical school, so his brother-in-law. He knew Joe was having problems with his marriage, and so he brought him by where I was working, and so we started dating again.
We both had prior marriages.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I had 2 sons at that point. And they were a big part of our labor here in the vineyard during the summer.
First year, these vines were planted.
Don't tell OSHA. We taught my oldest son, he was 12 years old, to drive the crawler. And he would drive the crawler through the vines, and his younger brother would water the vines out of out of a tank.
Yeah, off a tank.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so we've gotten you through college, through one set of married partners. You get married, and you're getting your MD at Stanford, and then I assume you're going to South Dakota for an internship? Or?
No. Actually, I was visiting my sons in Sweden. My wife had taken the 2 boys to Sweden. And I got a notice from my draft board. You either come back and enter an internship, or we're going to draft you as a private. So I came back. And it was.
And then you started
the
your
middle of the year.
internship.
It was December. Mm-hmm. So internships, that was halfway through.
Right.
So I went to the guy,
Harry Weinstein.
Harry Weinstein. We were called Harry's boys. And I went to Harry. I had applied there before at Mount Zion in San Francisco. And I told him the story, and I said, I'm going to be drafted. And he looked at me and he said, when do you want to start? And I said, this was on a Friday. I said, Monday. Fine.
And you started.
So I was part of 2 internship classes. And following that, I had a choice. We were either going to go to Canada and try to immigrate, or I could go in the public health service and serve the Indians. And that's what I got to do.
Wow.
And that was in Pine Ridge, South Dakota.
Yeah. So there's a fair amount of time between bachelor's degrees and somehow deciding that you wanted to be in the wine business.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand making home wine in South Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
Did that just come out of nowhere? Was that because you were both hippies and you were going back to the land and...
Probably the latter, yes. Yeah. At first.
Well, I wouldn't say so exactly. It's like growing up on a farm. I was always into food preservation, canning, bread making, and freezing. I actually won a trip to Chicago with the demonstration I did on freezing corn, which is pretty amazing. But anyway, so it kind of goes along with winemaking. Is like, okay, you're taking fruit, you're doing something with it to save it for later.
Yeah. And at some point, you were interested in drinking this product.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. we started visiting tasting rooms around Stanford.
When you were in Stanford.
At Stanford, because we didn't have money to eat at nice restaurants in San Francisco.
Right.
And then an orthopedic surgeon who I studied under invited us to his home and served us really good wines, the best Burgundies.
He actually did a blind tasting. We'd never been in a blind tasting before, and they were all white Burgundies. It was phenomenal. I'm sure Le Montrachet was there.
So that really piqued our interest. And
And then while we were getting ready to go to South Dakota, we splurged one night, and Joe and I went out to dinner at La Bourguignon, a restaurant in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, and we had a bottle of 69 Le Moussigny. And from then on, it's like, okay, I think it's Pinot Noir.
So that was really
really
a direction toward Pinot.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah. And then I think when we looked around here and said, well, what are people planting? It was obvious. It was at that time, it was Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
Mm-hmm.
So you finish your public health service gig in South Dakota.
Yes.
You come back to Hood River. You start looking there. Did you start hearing about what was going on in the Willamette Valley? How did you come 70 miles west?
I think we found this property. We were looking for farm property, and at that time I was working in the emergency department at Providence Hospital on the east side of Portland.
So you were living in Hood River and commuting into Providence?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we saw this advertised in the local newspaper, the property.
In
Actually, the Oregonian.
Was the Oregonian?
Mm-hmm.
112 acres, $69,000. And we said, hey, let's go look at that. And
had you met anybody in the wine industry
not at that point?
No. But we had been hearing, actually my dad had even been hearing about what was happening as far as people planting grapes. And so, we've been hearing rumors about, okay, these people coming up from California and planting grapes. And Sounded pretty good.
And so, Dave, when we came here to look at the property, we were at the head of the driveway, and we looked down and we said, this is it. That day, we negotiated a contract to buy this property, $500 down and $2,000 a month. And I had a really good job in the ER. I mean, I was making good money.
Yeah.
And so that's
Plus, we were willing to live in an 8x35 trailer house.
for a year.
Yep.
And I think also, yeah.
No, I was just, I mean, that seems so sudden. But you were in Portland, so I mean, that makes some sense. And, but this isn't Portland. I mean, this is.
But I always commuted. I commuted to Portland. I commuted to the ER in Longview, Washington for years. Right before I retired from the ER, which was only 5 years ago, I commuted to the Oregon coast. And I was still working 24-hour shifts. But I got a little sleep. Don't scare the patients.
Well, I think as we're winding up this pre-time, we need to drink some of the wine that you've opened for us today,
Okay.
which is 2012 La Boheme Pinot, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean,
You want to tell that
Oh,
story?
well, okay. The La Boheme field is up the hill. You can actually see it from here if you
from
look
the
straight
driveway,
up the hill.
Well, actually, yeah.
And so what we did, we wanted to plant this in 1985, and so we took cuttings from all of our best vines in the upper field over there, and we had them propagated and rooted, and then we planted the La Boheme field. And so I guess, what do you call it? Something massif?
Sélection massale.
Section massal.
So it was not one clone that you took cuttings from.
No, yes, it was.
Well, it
Everything.
was all the plants that we had gotten from Chuck Corey,
Yeah.
and we think it's pomard, quite sure. But there were other things mixed in there, and there were certain vines that looked like, okay, these are smaller clusters, these are healthy-looking vines, and so we're going to take our cuttings from those plants.
Also, if they tended to ripen earlier, at that point in time,
Yeah, you
that was
needed it.
really important.
Really?
Yeah.
Because we have a cool site here.
Yeah.
But everything on this property until last year is own rooted.
Right.
Yeah. So there's no grafted.
Cheers, David.
Cheers. And Dave, the 46-year-old vines look great.
Yeah.
And they're own rooted. I mean,
And this is sedimentary soil where vines are more endangered by phylloxera
Yeah.
than in basaltic
Yeah.
soils, hypothetically.
yeah.
Very nice.
It's pretty yummy. So, you find the property, 1973, right?
Right.
And
Right.
you move a trailer here. And it was the two of you and your two sons.
No, they
No,
were living in
they
Sweden.
were still in Sweden, okay.
But they would come
in the summer.
In the summers.
Okay. Eartha's the oldest, right?
Right.
And when was she born?
She was born in 68.
So you already had Eartha
Eartha.
and Adam at that point.
Yeah, they were both, Adam was born in South Dakota, and then Eartha was a year old when we moved to South Dakota.
Dave, I delivered Adam in South Dakota.
He did a good job, too.
Yeah, I did a good job. I said, here's a winemaker.
And Anna was born sometime after that.
Yes,
Yeah.
in McMinnville.
Yeah. So I now have to tell the embarrassing story
Okay.
of how we met.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. No, do.
Yeah, no. Actually, it wasn't how we met. We somehow met you before you had wine and before you had a winery, I'm assuming.
Absolutely.
And you invited us for a Saturday to come over to the house that you had built by then, which would have meant that it was 75?
74, yeah, it's probably 75 by then.
Yeah, 75. And so whatever we did, Ginny and I were driving to Portland when one of us remembered what our commitment was to be at your house for lunch.
Yeah.
And so we called you on our cell. No, we didn't. I mean,
There were no cell phones.
there were no cell phones, and so we were sort of, boy, did we screw up. And
Not a problem.
And Dave, we went that first year with no phone for a year.
in the
Yeah, so
in the
you
trailer.
you might not have even been able to call us. No, I don't know.
No, by then you were in the
I
house.
think we had
because,
a
Yeah.
phone by then.
yeah,
Yeah.
because pretty quickly you started building a house, and I assume that you did a lot of that work yourselves.
Yeah, we did. We did it all. Pretty much.
Well, we did the framing,
Yeah.
the roof, the electrical, the plumbing, and the sheetrock. I mean, it was all very exciting because it was all things that
They were
were
all
new
things
to
that were
us.
new to us, and
Yeah,
we
you
weren't.
had to learn each of those steps.
Well, we learned pretty much, but we did a crappy job. We didn't do a very good job, but we realized that. But I still think some of our kids' best memories are from that house. And we did learn enough to be able to turn an old barn into our first winery, where we did the electrical, we did the plumbing, and we
that
made
was
wine.
out in the middle. Where was that
It was
barn?
It was just pretty much straight up the hill
By the road.
before you come to that parking lot.
Where
Yeah.
the house was.
Yeah, where the
Near the
house,
house.
near
Yeah.
where
Near
the
the
house
house.
was.
Oh, it's where the barn was.
Yeah.
Oh, but
Yeah.
it was on this side of the road, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And,
On the east side.
And we made wine there for 5 years. So it
And you-
served its purpose.
And in 77, or no, not 77, in probably 78, you threw a big party where you invited at least the wine community and probably the actual customers to come. And we certainly came to that and bought a little wine. I looked around in the cellar to see if there was anything left, and I don't think
I don't think so.
left.
Yeah, these.
You know, 77 was, for us, I think, a pretty disastrous vintage, our first vintage.
It was probably the coolest summer we've ever
Yeah.
had.
But then 78, 79 were really good for us.
Yeah.
And by that time, we had been to France, read everything we could about winemaking. Pat, of course, had a great background in farming, and I had a good background in chemistry. And so, you know, things fit together.
One of the questions I have is a background in farming and a background in chemistry is great, and even making home wine is helpful. But all of those things are a far cry from running a commercial vineyard and winery and making wine and
Absolutely.
more incredibly selling
Yeah.
wine.
Absolutely.
But Dave, that was true of most, not all. I mean, some came out of UC Davis, which we didn't. But I don't think that gave them a great advantage.
No, I mean, 77 was a tough year.
Oh.
Was it compounded by a certain lack of experience in making commercial wine?
It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. But like I say, by 78, 79, we had relatively really good success.
I think the best thing we did in 77 was to buy French oak barrels from your friend Becky Wasserman.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was really, really wonderful to have such good oak. And then we realized, okay, the wine's a little thin, but at least we have really good oak. And of course, oak has been a major part of our winemaking ever since then, for the Pinot Noir.
Yeah. Who did you first meet, other winemakers in this founding generation? And did you go looking for them? Did they find you? What was
Well, Joe has a story about that.
Yeah. The first person I met was Dave Lett. And it was a very brief meeting through a screen door, as I recall.
Where you went to his house?
Yeah, I went to his house, and it was pouring rain. And Dave came to the door, and he had a terrible cold. And again, it was pouring rain. I don't even remember what month it was.
January, probably.
But I said to him somewhat seriously, I said, Dave, I'm glad to meet you. We're thinking of planting grapes, wine grapes. And he looked at me and said, why do you want to do that? And that's Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
And did that conversation then change after that, or was that?
I think it did. Yeah. Yeah, it did.
I think that most of the people that we met from the very young industry at that time, we met at the Tigard Fire Hall, where we would go and get together with other people, taste rarely, but sometimes some of the wines that people had made. And so we in 76, we worked at Tualatin Vineyards and helped them with their harvest some, because they were right up the hill from us, and that was a good learning experience.
Did you work in the field, in the winery?
In the winery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just volunteer labor.
Yeah. No, but that's actually quite smart.
Yeah.
Way to sort of have commercial quantities of grapes around. Yeah.
And that was after our trip to Champagne and Burgundy, which we ended up picking grapes in Champagne and then visiting some wonderful people in Burgundy and seeing what they did there. And I think that's when we really started getting the idea, okay, we need to sort of emulate Burgundy. And that's when we decided that even early on in our winemaking, we started making single vineyard wines because we knew that the site was so important for giving the wine the character. And so in 1979, we made wines from 3 different soil types, 3 different vineyards. Dundee Hills Vineyard, Wind Hill Vineyard, and then our own vineyard.
Bowers,
Yeah.
right.
And so we purchased grapes from those growers. How many years?
For probably 25 years. 25 for Wind Hill and probably 20 for
And they became
Dundee.
some of our very, very best friends.
Yeah.
Well, you and John Bowers were both physicians.
Yes.
And
We had that in common.
And was there a medical cabal?
No.
Where?
No, there wasn't. John is the only one I knew initially, and then we met Dan. Is it Jepson?
Oh.
We bought from.
Dan Jepson?
We bought
from Alpine
Cabernet
Vineyard.
from Alpine.
Yeah.
Alpine.
Yeah, that's right. That's
and he's
right.
a physician.
Well, I had no idea.
Yeah,
Wow.
he worked at the health service at the U of O.
You both, yeah.
And then, of course, rather rapidly after that, we had the physicians at Veritas and Highland? No, I don't think Highland.
Yeah.
They were more engineers, weren't they?
There was one physician
Was
in
there?
that group.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there wasn't a secret medical society about.
No, but there was a society. John Bowers, I think it was probably his idea. We formed a group patterned after a group in San Francisco that's physicians. And we named it the Society of Physicians for Wine and Health. And it still exists. There's probably 75 members. And they're mostly retired physicians, but they bring in, at a couple of dinners a year, they bring in experts in the science of wine, the health of wine. Yeah.
But you were also involved in, or certainly John Bowers was involved in the founding of the Knights of the Vine.
Yeah,
Right?
and that
Right.
became the Oregon Wine Brotherhood.
Yeah.
But I was involved with that also because of John. Yeah, but John was really the main push behind that group.
Well, and he didn't have a winery.
No,
No.
he had a vineyard.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And neither did Sandy, for that matter.
Nope.
No,
No.
no.
And eventually you bought Sandy's vineyard
We
from
did.
them.
And actually, one of the great privileges in my life was asking to speak at his funeral. But Sandy was just a great person.
Yeah. We had been friends with them for a long, long time. And then when he, in 1995, when he decided he wanted to sell the vineyard and retire, he said, well, I've decided to sell Wind Hill. He always talked very formally like that. And we said, oh, that's great, Sandy. And he said, and I've decided to sell it to you.
And we had just bought.
We just bought the property at Mount Richmond.
Mount Richmond.
So we said, I'm sorry, but we can't afford it. He said, I'll make sure you can.
But it was so funny, Dave. I remember sitting, I think it was a coffee shop in Forest Grove across from him. And we were negotiating. And I remember saying something to him like, Sandy, I think we need to pay you 7% interest. Whatever it was at that time. And Sandy said, oh, no, that's too much. Maybe 6. But that's the way the negotiation
It
went.
was a backward negotiation.
It was a backward.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I think the wine industry has benefited by being beloved by Oregonians, whether they were grape growers or customers. It was such a special thing that was being created, and I think whether it was Sandy Reese or some customer that we barely know, delighted in whatever role they could play in helping. And I think there were genuine benefits to being in that founding period and having people that were so devoted to it.
I agree. Yeah. And you know, when I knew, Dave, that was true, was when I saw the Oregon wine license plate. And I thought, okay, they do like us.
And you saw how popular it was.
Well, I mean, it was the
popular.
most successful license plate that they had launched in a period.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I don't know that it still is, but I think it was successful beyond their wildest dreams.
And even back in the very early days, and I know you worked at, was it L'Omelette?
Yeah.
L'Omelette?
Oh, yeah.
The restaurant industry was, for the most part, really supportive and made sure that they had some Oregon wines on their list. And shops like Stroheckers, they made sure that that they carried Oregon wines, and so it was, like you say, very, very supportive.
Yeah. And Dave, you know that other places, like New York and Boston, it was like pulling teeth.
Oh,
in the early years.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, starting in '77, you were selling wine. What was your approach to selling wine? Did you sell, I mean, whatever, but I mean, where was your wine sold in the beginning?
Okay, well,
Mostly
right away, we started doing, special events even at our old building there, and we did what we called the Riesling Festival, and then later on, when we had the newer facility, we did jazz festivals on Memorial Day weekend and Labor Day weekend. So we tried to go to the public as much as possible, but we did try to sell to stores. We had a distributorship was selling some of our 1979 wines, and it was a national distributor. What's his name? Anyway, they started buying our wines in 1979. And
was that Robert Haas?
Robert Haas.
Robert Haas.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. I had forgotten you were with Robert Haas.
Yeah.
So how long were you with them?
About 4 years. Yep. And then we started getting our own smaller distributors, which really works out a lot better, I think, than having one national.
Yeah. One of the things I'm asking many of the wineries is about the role of women in the founding of the industry.
Okay.
And the difference between Washington County and Yamhill County. which I believe that in Washington County, 6 or 7 of the women of the couples that were the founding wineries there were meeting. I mean, it was Marge Volsteck and Nancy Ponzi and Mrs. Fuller, whatever her first name is. Virginia, yes, exactly. Virginia Fuller and a few others were meeting very early on to promote events, to promote tourism, to promote the idea of people coming out to the wineries. And
They put together the very first Oregon wine brochure.
Exactly. Wow. Were you part of that group?
No, I wasn't part of that group.
Yeah. And Yamhill County wasn't. I mean, you're officially in Yamhill County, but it's very close to the border. And it's my take that in Yamhill County, we were much less focused on special events, particularly further south than you, further away from Portland. I mean, Diana and David Lett did Thanksgiving and maybe one other weekend, but most people didn't do very much. When we started, we didn't do anything for a while, and then finally tried to do our own Rain Revels event, and but it was not the focus. The focus was on finding distributors and then working with Stephen Carey and the other wineries to find distributors around the country. And so it was very different than what Washington County did, which was much more focused, maybe with the exception of the Ponzis, but most of them were much more focused on local. But you had found your own independent route with, I mean, going to Robert Haas early on, what would be called in today's world a broker, to represent you.
Actually, they came to us, but yeah. Well, I think the other thing I'd like to say about the role of women in wine in our early industry is that so many of the women worked so hard, not just on marketing, but they worked in the vineyards and they worked in the wineries, and I've always been pleased that Joe has always given me half credit for the winemaking that I was responsible for. And one of the things that really helped me was we took a trip to California, and the purpose was to go visit with Mary Edwards and Zelma Long. Because at that time, they were the only 2 women winemakers almost in the whole world.
Yeah, no, it was a very different universe.
And Noble came on as a professor at UC Davis a few years after that, and she was just, blazing new territory.
Right.
But then now you look across the world and then like, oh my gosh.
No, I mean, it's a very different world. Yeah. I mean, some of the things that happened back at the beginning, there's this famous photo of the beginnings of the Yamhill County Wineries Association. And I didn't remember this, but Diana told me that all the couples were there, and the photographer was going to take...
wanted the guys.
Only wanted the winemakers, which by his own definition became the guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty sexist.
And that photo
it was very sexist.
That photo has stood the test of time too. You see it everywhere, right?
Well, it has, but it now for me has a very bleak backstory.
Yeah.
Dave, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing we did, and this is my recollection, you know how there's warning labels, of course, on wine, like there is on tobacco. And we always thought, well, what about the healthful aspects of wine? So for a few years, at the bottom of our label, it said, Joe Campbell, MD, winemaker. And I think you're the one that thought that would help our marketing.
Yeah,
and
I did.
I really resisted it. And then I thought, okay, for marketing, I guess I can agree to that. But I never.
I kind of wish I never would have done it too.
Yeah, I know you did it. Yeah, but it was for that reason.
It was for marketing. It was.
Well, and Susan Sokol-Blosser said, as we were having this conversation, that she realizes that she enabled some of this, that it wasn't all guys doing it to the women, that women were coming out of a society at the time where women didn't have the roles of prominence. And so it was interesting to me and she and you are two of the women that have actually run the business in a way that many others never did. And it was interesting to have her explain what she thought, that she had some complicity in it too.
And David, I think one thing that's different, and you can call me if I'm wrong on this, but I think as a couple, we worked in the vineyards, in the winery, and it was equal.
And the
It's
marketing.
equal. And I don't know, we never had a other winemaker.
Yeah.
We brought Adam on
Yeah.
and taught him for 5 years before he took over. But we never had a vineyard manager, a winemaker other than us. And I don't know if any other wineries did that.
No. And I mean, my perception of what you did is you were both in charge of both the vineyard and the winery.
Yeah.
And that neither of you was the vineyard manager, neither of you was the singular
And really,
winemaker.
neither of us claimed that.
No.
And I think that's a unique story.
Yeah.
It speaks to getting along, among other things.
Well,
It's true. It's true.
one thing when I knew we were going to do this, of course, I started thinking of all these things. And I thought when I was brought up, my two parents ran a motel, a small one, 7 days a week, and they worked together. They did almost everything. My dad made beds, they cleaned together, but it was 7 days. And I thought back, well, were their roles different? Well, they tended to be it sometimes. I mean, my dad, in order to pay the mortgage, would stay up till 2 a.m. He would leave the lights on. And a customer came in at 2, 3 in, he would put him in a room.
Sign them in.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I had that example.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you, certainly times were changing in the 70s.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was not the 1940s and 50s, but it also wasn't what we see today. I mean, it was a
Right,
very different world, and not just because we didn't have cell phones. And so I think the example that you presented to, in essence, the world of a co-management is pretty unique, and even today that almost doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Do you know if have you ever met another couple with an equal role in this?
So,
Oh, I haven't
I don't
really
think so.
thought about it.
Yeah.
yeah.
Pat, would you discover on the back of the bottle, would you pick that up and point
Sure. Yeah. I'm very proud of this. It says 1979 Pinot Noir, Willamette Valley, Pat and Joe Campbell, winemakers.
that out? Yeah.
So
That's a pretty profound statement, in fact.
I was very proud of it.
Yeah. As the wine industry developed, were there aspects of the winemaking community that were important to you enough to spend time outside the winery and outside medicine and outside what you were doing to be involved in? Legislation or whatever, events?
As I remember it back then, we did get to the meetings at the Tigard Hall, Fire Hall, and that was important to us to get together with other people there. For a brief while, I was on a committee, and I'm not sure even which committee it was. I can't remember, but we really had our hands full here with our family.
Right.
and
3 kids on top of.
trying to do everything that we were doing with our vineyards and our winery. So I do remember really being so happy that there were people who did this for the labeling legislation, for assessing a tax on grapes so that we could use it for promoting winery, I mean marketing, and also for research.
Right. One of the things that's amazing in the wine industry is that there is a second generation that was brought up, scared to death, and yet has really taken over. And it's not just Elk Cove, of course, but
No.
Adam's got to have been one of the first, and certainly taken.
Louis Ponzi,
Yeah.
probably right about the same time.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah.
But Adam has really taken Elk Cove, and really, it's really his in a sense. And even as he's honoring what the two of you have done, but he's really grabbed it and is really made it ever more successful. Did you consciously think about what would happen to Elk Cove as you grew older?
David, I don't think I did. I think that after the two of us worked with Adam for 5 years, we just had confidence in him that we could walk away and that we needed to walk away and to let him really take control. And we just had total confidence that he would do that. And
I mean, he wasn't, prior to those 5 years, he wasn't going to do it. Right?
no, he graduated in political science. We thought he was going to be a lawyer. And he didn't. But he came to us and he said, I want to be a winemaker.
Yeah, and it was one of the happiest days of our lives because by that time we were getting pretty tired.
You know, we ended up doing this for 20 years. And Adam actually is, I think it's on his 21st year.
Yeah, we did it for 21, and now he's 21.
21?
Yeah.
And then we're so thankful that Anna joined us and does all of our social media, incredible photography.
Yep.
A lot of our marketing.
You know, our marketing online now. I mean, we're doing better this year, we just heard, than last year. Before the virus, we're doing better than before.
Really?
Yes.
So one thing we haven't talked about very much, but is, you know, how important it was to be able to keep track of records, keep track of all the licensing and all that, which I did a lot of that, and Joe helped with going down to meet with lawyers.
Well, I did all the BATF
yeah,
reports.
BATF stuff, and but we quickly got wind of Irving and Company, who has done a lot of the bookkeeping for a lot of the wineries, and that was one of the things that Jack said to us is how important it was going to be for us to empower Adam and give him half ownership. And I'm not exactly sure which year that was, but it was quite early.
After he'd become winemaker?
After he'd become winemaker.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's worked out very well for us. And I think for him as well. He really feels like, okay, this is my baby.
Yeah, oh, I think so. So the process wasn't foretold when you were being winemaker, while you were doing it, but once he came to you and said that that's what he would like to do, obviously you were pleased.
Yeah.
And again, he worked with us for 5 years.
No, I get that.
Yeah, and he did all the tough stuff.
And he was very, very cautious in the beginning when we decided we wanted to buy the Mount Richmond property, which was 102 acres. He walked the whole property with us and was really, really concerned about, okay, do you think this will be all right? Do you think this will be all right? And you know, really thinking ahead. And of course, that property, along with the one that we bought across the road, accounts for like 325 acres of our vineyards. So incredibly important to know that this is a good place to farm.
Yeah. Well, and then you've got the 2 properties in the Shayla Mountains as well.
Right.
Was that started before? Was Adam in that house early on?
No, we purchased their grapes for how many years?
I think
Oh, of
about
course you
5
did.
years.
5 years?
Yeah, that's right. Of course you
And then
did. Yeah.
we bought it.
And did you buy the grapes from where you live in the basaltic part of Parrot Mountain before you?
No, we never bought those grapes until we owned
I think
the property.
we were buying those grapes when
They
you
were,
bought
Yeah, I
them.
think
there
you
were
were.
several wineries that were
That's
buying
right.
those.
And
There's one or two. There's
Still-
still, I think, just one.
Yeah,
And I forget.
Soder, I think. Well, Dave, I guess you probably know by now that I've always admired you for the work that you've done for the Oregon wine industry. And one of my best memories, more socially minded, is when we came to your and Ginny's home, and you were having a big feast with Becky Wasserman, who was the person we were buying barrels from for quite a few years. And I don't know, you just were so hospitable, sociable, so welcoming. And I always have felt that way about you and Ginny.
Nice. Thanks.
And now about Eugenia as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
And David, as you may know, the 2 of us are very apolitical, not very political, more so now than ever before. Yeah. But, I always just admired the legislation that you helped put through and all of the work you did on that and the labeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I say, we just weren't involved in that.
Yeah, no, and
Yeah.
and I one of the things that we're teasing out by talking to these people is kind of what was the area where they were comfortable, each of them, and nobody was doing exactly what somebody else was doing, and it's kind of what made us powerful. The thing that I always talk about when I'm talking more generally about the Willamette Valley wine industry is the focus that we had on making great wine from the beginning. And obviously, with the 2 of you working together on that, were you referencing Burgundy in the early days, or were you, how were you trying to make progress on making better wine as you think back on that?
I think in the vineyard more than anything. And my recollection is that Richard Smart came to Oregon from Australia, and he had done research.
It would have been in 1984.
Oh, yeah, because he published, I think, something in 1982 with Syrah in Australia, where he was really emphasizing opening up the canopy, leaf pulling, exposing, to control disease, to ripen fruit, all of those things. And now, today, I think everyone does that.
Right. Everyone who wants to make good Pinot Noir
Does it?
does that, right?
So those were the things that we didn't invent. And I don't think he invented it either, but he certainly...
No, and Koblet from Switzerland had a lot to do with that too.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, Richard came to the first ever Cool Climate Symposium that was held in Eugene that the OSU Food Science Department really had organized. And it was a little based on what had gone on at Davis a couple of years before their centennial. But we wouldn't have ever had all these scientists in Oregon at the same time if it hadn't been for that first Cool Climate Conference.
Absolutely.
And
So that made a huge difference, I thought.
Yeah, but I think that, of course, now it's very, very difficult to find great bottles of Burgundy because they're so frightfully expensive.
Yeah.
But in the early years, when even before we started making wine commercially, we were buying $12 bottles of the finest Burgundies.
Of DRCs.
And so there's a high bar there, and it's, of course, it's something we've always kind of wanted to go after, and I don't know whether we'll ever achieve it, or if we do, whether people will think we achieved it, but we're working on it.
That's a pretty high bar to
It's a high bar.
yeah.
But we actually bought those DRCs in Forest Grove.
Well, no, and then we bought some from Henry
yeah.
Hinsdale from
Yeah.
the warehouse,
Yeah.
most of them.
When you look back at the 50 plus years that the wine industry has existed in the Willamette Valley, and the 47 years that you've been in business, or 46, whatever that math would work out to be, are there a lot of things that you wished you'd done that you didn't do?
Yeah, not made the mistakes we made. Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, we could have made better wine in 1985 if we would have done more thinning. We did make probably one of the finest Pinot Noirs from Linfield Vineyard that year, just because they had a small crop. So you can think about that, or you can think about, okay, why did we ever try to ferment Pinot Noir in a 3,000 gallon tank, right? With no cooling, and I guess we did have cooling, but anyway. Yeah, it's just, I mean, so mistakes, but we did learn from them, for sure.
And what are the things that you think back on that you did right, or that the Willamette Valley industry did right, that makes you proud? You first. I mean,
Well, to start
what you
with-
guys did first.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe one of the first things that we did, and this was on the advice of Chuck Curry, is we planted our first vineyard. As you can see, it's 6 by 7, and so that was very, very good for getting the kind of quality that we needed to get in our grapes.
The narrowness of the rows.
Narrow planting.
Which was, I mean, we were at 10 feet when we were planting, so this was extremely narrow.
Yes.
I mean, this
Extremely.
is now a standard planting.
Yeah. David, I think the other thing we did well, my income, we didn't use it to buy a fancy car. Instead, we bought a Lamborghini tractor, and we inherited a Ferrari tractor. And we drove about an 8 or 10-year-old Buick. On the side of the Buick, with the dust, the kids wrote Birdmobile, because we would drive it through the vineyard, getting rid of robins.
Yep.
Ooh, yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
those early years.
Oh, yeah. Now they have a lot more to eat, and they're a lot, with global warming, they don't get here
They don't
until-
get here that early.
Yeah.
No.
I thought it turned out pretty good.
I have to say that.
We're still married.
Yeah, yeah, we're very, very pleased with how it's turned out. But I think it's like still a work in progress, and certainly this year is throwing some real fright into us. And as if you can look at the forests out there in the canyon, and are we going to be able to survive forest fires and climate change? So it's pretty frightening, but yet at the same time, we have a great crew. We have our vineyard manager's been with us for over 20 years. Our assistant winemaker for, was it 18 years, Anna?
Wow.
And then of course Adam for way more than that. And then we have many people that are working for us in, like Jose, who's in charge of our bottling line. And he's been with us for over 20 years. And we have vineyard people also that have been with us that long.
Yeah.
And yeah, well, go ahead.
Oh, well, and that provides real kind of comfort and consistency to what we're
and a
doing.
historical knowledge of how
Yeah.
you do things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, David, I'm very proud that we've been able to provide health insurance for our full-time workers, all of them, and we've provided a retirement program for them, although not all of them use it.
Right.
Yeah, but we're very proud of that.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to take this opportunity to do one more toast, but for
Let's do that.
doing so many things correctly, congratulations
Thank you.
to you.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, and congratulations on 50
Yeah.
years. That's wonderful.
Wow.
Thank you.